I am Jessica, and throughout my life, I felt overlooked in my family. My younger sister, Betty, seemed to be the focal point of everything. She was undoubtedly the favorite, the flawless child who could never make a mistake. Betty was the daughter my parents had always envisioned, while I was the quiet one, the bookworm, who found joy in solving math problems rather than attending parties. My passion lay in learning, and I excelled at it, yet in a family that valued charm over intellect, I often felt unnoticed. I vividly recall a day when I was 13 and Betty was 11. During a family barbecue, I was eager to share my victory in a regional spelling bee. "Mom, Dad, guess what?" I exclaimed, running towards them with my certificate in hand. I won the spelling bee. My mom glanced at me briefly before her attention shifted back to Betty, who was performing cartwheels on the lawn. "That's nice, dear," she said absent-mindedly, then turned to Betty. "Sweetie, be careful, or you'll get grass stains on your new dress." I remained there, holding my certificate while everyone applauded Betty's cartwheels, uninterested in my accomplishment. This pattern persisted. Betty received new clothes while I inherited hers, and she had dance lessons while I was given a library card. Betty was showered with praise and attention, as I grew accustomed to being overlooked. As we transitioned into our teenage years, nothing changed. Betty blossomed into a vibrant and popular teenager. In contrast, I immersed myself further in books and numbers, seeking solace in a realm where hard work outweighed charm. "Jessica, why can't you be more like your sister?" became a familiar refrain, followed by, "Betty, you're perfect just the way you are," as soon as my parents turned to her. I endeavored not to let it affect me, reassuring myself that one day my diligence and intellect would pay off. When I commenced high school, I devoted myself intensely to my studies with the hope that my accomplishments would finally earn my parents' recognition. Despite my efforts, I couldn't rival Betty's popularity. In my junior year, I triumphed in the state math competition, facing off against the brightest students in a challenging test of numbers and logic. Announcing my name as the winner filled me with pride and hope, for I had achieved something truly remarkable. I hurried home that day, eager to share the news, only to find the usual scene, my parents doting on Betty, who was trying on a new costume. "Mom, Dad, guess what?" I sputtered breathlessly. "I won the state math competition." My mom offered a fleeting smile. "Oh, that's nice, St. Betty. Honey, turn around so we can see the back." My dad remained focused on adjusting Betty's costume, without looking up. "Good job, Jessica." "Betty, are you sure this fits? It seems a bit tight on the shoulders." I stood there, clutching my trophy, feeling dejected. "But it's the state competition," I murmured. I beat hundreds of other students." Unfazed, my mom replied, "That's great, sweetie. Betty has a big performance this weekend, and we need to ensure everything is perfect." Once again, my moment of triumph was overshadowed. Retreating to my room, I placed the trophy on my desk, where it was ignored, except by me, collecting dust as time passed. When college applications loomed, I poured every ounce of effort into them, determined to gain admission to a prestigious school and prove my worth. The long-awaited day arrived, and the acceptance letters came. I had secured a spot at a top university with a full scholarship to study financial analysis. Hands trembling, I read the letter with tears of joy streaming down my face. Rushing to the living room where my parents sat with Betty, I announced, "I got in." Voice shaking with emotion. "A full scholarship to study financial analysis at." Before I could finish, Betty jumped up. "Oh my God, I forgot I need a new costume for my performance next week." Instantly, the attention diverted. My parents grabbed their keys and wallets, rushing to assist Betty. I stood there, acceptance letter in hand, reminded once more that I would remain unseen. Standing alone in the vacant living room, I clutched my acceptance letter, overwhelmed with a mixture of emotions as I listened to the fading sound of the car backing out of the driveway. It wasn't until much later that evening that my parents returned, arms laden with shopping bags filled with Betty's latest costume and accessories. The topic of my acceptance was simply brushed aside, not mentioned again. I delved into my studies at the university, while Betty chose a different trajectory, attending the local community college. She seemed more captivated by her social activities than her academic pursuits and soon began dating Kevin, her high school sweetheart. In contrast, I immersed myself in the realm of financial analytics where, for the first time, my dedication and intellect were recognized and valued. I forged strong friendships with individuals who shared my enthusiasm for numbers, providing a sense of belonging I had longed for. Back at home, Betty's life unfolded precisely as my parents had envisioned. She wedded Kevin shortly after college, celebrating with an extravagant wedding funded entirely by my parents. I participated as a bridesmaid, feeling like an outsider within my own family. A year later, Betty announced her pregnancy, and the birth of her child transformed my parents into doting grandparents. We're grandparents. Can you believe it, Jessica? Aren't you excited to be an aunt? My teary-eyed dad exclaimed. I was genuinely happy for Betty, but couldn't shake the feeling of being overlooked yet again. I had just secured a position at a top financial firm in the city, a personal achievement that felt diminished compared to Betty's milestone of motherhood. 3 years later, when Betty had her second child, the cycle repeated itself. She was the perfect daughter with the ideal family, while I was just Jessica, the one who immersed herself in work, remained single, and hadn't given her parents grandchildren to cherish. By the time I reached 31, I advanced to senior financial analyst, earning the respect of colleagues and clients alike. For the first time, I felt genuinely proud of my accomplishments. To commemorate my success, I decided to purchase a house, a gorgeous one-bedroom property in an excellent neighborhood. It wasn't a palatial estate, but it was my own, paid for with my hard-earned money. The day I held the keys, pride blossomed within me like never before. Eagerly, I invited my family to tour my new home, hoping they would finally acknowledge my achievements. When they arrived, Betty was accompanied by her children, and my parents fussed over their grandchildren as I guided them through the house. My mom, seemingly unimpressed, remarked, "It's such a big house for just one person, isn't it?" Crestfallen, I responded, "It's an investment, and now I have space for a home office." My dad added, "Well, I suppose that makes sense," though his lack of sincerity was evident. As they prepared to leave, I overheard my mom whisper to Betty, "It's a shame Jessica doesn't have a family to fill that big house, but I suppose her career is really important to her." A few months passed as I settled into my new abode before receiving an unexpected family dinner invitation. Surprised, as they often excluded me from gatherings for being different or uninteresting, I accepted, hoping perhaps things were changing. Upon my arrival, my dad awkwardly patted my shoulder. "Jessica, good of you to come. Have a seat. We have something important to discuss." A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Important discussions typically brought good news for Betty and disappointment for me. Still, I sat down, cautiously optimistic. Throughout dinner, conversation revolved around Betty's children and Kevin's job. Trying to mention a significant work project I had recently completed, I was interrupted by Timothy's cries for more dessert, my words going unheard. After dinner, we migrated to the living room where my mother cleared her throat. "Jessica, dear, we've been thinking," she began. My muscles tensed, anticipating the worst. "You're single, without children, and you have that big house all to yourself," she continued, as if pointing out a major flaw. "Yes," I replied slowly, dreading the direction of the conversation. My dad chimed in. "Well, we think it would be best if you gave your house to Betty and her family." I blinked, certain I had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Just hand them the keys and move out," my mom said casually, as if requesting me to pass the salt, "because they need the space more." Looking around, I waited for someone to crack a smile and reveal it was all a joke, but everyone wore serious expressions. Betty sat there, looking content, while Kevin consoled her with a pat on the shoulder. "You're joking, right?" I finally asked. "Jessica, now," my mom responded with that patronizing tone she used whenever she thought I was being unreasonable. I braced myself for what would come next. "Don't be selfish, Jessica. Betty needs the room more than you do," my mom said. "You're just one person, after all." "It's your responsibility as her sister," my dad added, as if that finalized everything. Family helps family. Feeling like I was trapped in some bizarre dream, I finally spoke, my voice barely a whisper. But it's my house, I protested. I worked hard, earned my own money, and bought it myself. Betty chimed in with a syrupy voice. Come on, Jessica. You know how cramped it is with 2 kids in our small apartment. You'd be doing us such a huge favor. I stood, my hands trembling. No, I asserted, my voice growing stronger. Absolutely not. I'm not giving you my house. The room erupted. My parents rattled off every supposed favor they had done for me over the years. Betty continually complained about the struggles of raising kids. Kevin simply nodded, as if everything was perfectly normal. As I left, I heard my mom call out, "Think about it, Jessica. Don't be selfish." In the days following that dreadful dinner, my life descended into chaos. My parents evidently informed the whole family that I was greedy. Suddenly, relatives I hadn't spoken to in ages were reaching out, convinced they understood what was best for me. One afternoon, my great-aunt Kimberly, whom I hadn't seen since my teenage years, called. "Jessica," she nearly gasped, "I've heard about your situation. How could you be so heartless?" She chided, "You're just an old maid hoarding money for no reason." The next day, my distant cousin Gary texted, "Hey Jessica, I heard you're being difficult. Why don't you just move to some deserted island and live as a hermit? You're basically an outcast already." 3 weeks after that disastrous family dinner, I was at home, bedridden with a bad cold, wrapped in a blanket and sipping hot tea. A peculiar noise at my front door caught my attention. It sounded like someone was tampering with the lock. My heart raced. Was someone attempting to break in? I gently set down my tea and cautiously approached the door, my legs trembling beneath me. Peering through the peephole, I nearly let out a gasp. On my porch were my sister, my parents, and Kevin. Betty was crouched by the lock, a hairpin in hand, attempting to pick it open. My parents stood nearby, keeping watch, while Kevin lurked further back, appearing anxious. Without hesitation, I pulled open the door. They backed away, startled. "What in the world do you think you're doing?" I demanded, my voice raspy from the cold, but filled with rage. For a moment, they simply gaped at me, caught red-handed. Then, to my utter disbelief, my mother rationalized, "We thought you'd be at work. We were just going to move in." "Move in?" I echoed, astonished. "You mean break in and occupy my house without my consent?" "Jessica," my father tried to reason, "we knew you wouldn't report us. We're family." I glanced past them to the driveway and spotted a car filled with boxes and suitcases. They'd actually planned to move in behind my back. "Get off my property," I said, my voice low and firm. "Now, or I will call the police." I showed them my phone already dialed to 911 and held it up for emphasis. "Last chance. Leave now." Disbelief painted their faces, but slowly they turned and left. I observed them depart, my entire body quaking. Once they were gone, I secured the door, leaned against it, and slid to the floor, contemplating my next move. The following day, I contacted a security company. They installed surveillance cameras around my house, sophisticated ones with voice recording capabilities. But technology alone didn't provide peace of mind. I had always wanted a dog, and now I had the perfect justification to get one. Driven by determination, I headed to the local animal shelter, eager to find a loyal companion. I met Buddy at the shelter, a large mixed-breed dog with intelligent eyes and a cautious nature. The staff explained to me that his previous owners abandoned him due to his protective behavior, yet behind that, I saw a loyal and loving dog. Buddy and I formed a bond quickly. At home, he was affectionate, always staying close to me, while transforming into a fierce guard dog whenever a stranger got near the house, his deep bark serving as a deterrent to any potential trespassers. I decided to prepare a cozy kennel for Buddy in the backyard, complete with a snug doghouse and a variety of toys, which he seemed to adore, often basking in the sun when not patrolling the yard. Life was serene for 3 months until an urgent work matter required me to leave town for the weekend. Reluctant to go, I felt assured by my neighbor, Mrs. Thomas, who often adored Buddy, bringing him treats and taking him for walks when I worked late. But on the second night, I received a frantic call from Mrs. Thomas. "Jessica, dear, there's been an incident," her voice trembling. "Buddy bit a stranger, chased them from the yard onto the street. The police are here now." I immediately caught the first flight back, my mind racing. Upon arriving, I was met with a scene straight out of my worst nightmares. My parents' car was in front of my house, with Betty looking smug and furious, and 4 police officers present. Approaching cautiously, I inquired, "What's going on here?" An officer responded, "Ma'am, we received a complaint regarding your dog attacking someone. Can you clarify what happened?" Before I could explain, Betty interjected furiously. "Her monster of a dog attacked my husband. It jumped over the fence and bit him. He could have been killed." Suddenly, the pieces fell into place. The stranger Buddy bit was Kevin. "That's not accurate," I asserted firmly. "My dog was defending my property from intruders. If your husband was bitten, it was because he attempted to break in." Betty's face flushed with anger. "Liar. That beast must be put down before it harms anyone else." My parents, who've been unusually silent, finally spoke, were pressing charges, declared my father, eyes gleaming, and "You'll have to cover Kevin's medical expenses." An officer, noting the family tension, said, "Ma'am, due to the complaint, we must take your dog for evaluation at the kennel. If deemed aggressive, he may face a grim fate." My heart sank as I watched animal control load Buddy into their van. He looked at me with bewildered, sad eyes, tears welling up in mine. As the officers and animal control departed, my mother whispered cruelly, "You know, Jessica, all this could have been avoided had you just given us the house." She smiled maliciously. "It's not too late. Give us the house and we'll drop the charges. Otherwise, well, you know what happens to aggressive dogs." I stood frozen, watching them drive away with smug satisfaction. Then a sudden revelation struck me: the security cameras. Rushing into the house, my heart racing, I retrieved the security footage from the night before. Holding my breath, I prayed it captured what I needed. The video was clear. On it, Betty and Kevin stealthily approached my front door, nervously glancing around. Then, Buddy came into view, his fur bristling, warning them with a low growl, followed by Betty's voice, "Kevin, kick the dog. When it bites you, we can accuse Jessica for compensation. Even better, get the house in exchange for the dog's life." My stomach turned. Visibly seen, Kevin provoked Buddy, who bit him in self-defense after being kicked. The next morning, I called my parents, keeping my voice steady. "We need to have a serious conversation. Can you come over to my house?" There was a brief pause. Then my Kevin, with a large bandage around his leg, and Betty, entered my living room an hour after my mother's overly sweet voice announced their arrival. My parents, Betty and Kevin, looked smug, believing they had won. Betty made herself at home, commenting with disdain that the lamp was ugly and the couch was not good enough, suggesting replacements. Holding back my irritation, I finally interrupted her to maintain calm. "Before we discuss anything," I said, motioning them toward the TV on the wall, "I think you should watch this first. Please sit down." They did, Betty perching on the edge of the armrest, annoyed, as I hit play. As the footage rolled, confusion turned to shock, then horror on their faces. Betty was the first to react, her voice high with panic, trying to dismiss the recorded footage as just a prank. Kevin nodded in agreement, wincing with the movement. "No harm was meant," he added, suggesting we let it go. My father, understanding the situation's gravity, leaned in and attempted to pacify me. "Jessica, sweetheart," he said, "let's settle this within the family." But my smile was cold and mirthless. "Too late for that," I replied, glancing at my watch. Right on cue, there was a knock, a perfect timing of the police officers I had called earlier. "Please come in," I said, stepping aside for the officers. I presented them the footage as evidence of attempted break-in and blackmail. It was a flurry of activity. Betty and Kevin were cuffed, their rights read aloud. My parents pleaded, my mother's tears overflowing. "Jessica, please. We're family." Despite a fleeting sting of sadness, Long-suppressed pain and resentment fueled my resolve. "You should have considered that before trying to take my home and hurt my dog," I stated coldly, as they were let out. The fresh start granted solace. I retrieved Buddy from the animal shelter that night, his tail wagging energetically, showering me with kisses. "Let's go home, Buddy," I whispered. In the whirlwind that followed, Betty and Kevin faced trial, their guilt captured on clear footage. They received probation and a hefty fine awarded to me. Severing ties with my immediate family felt necessary, but I informed our extended family of the truth, forwarding the footage. Supportive messages flooded in, relatives once distant now apologetic. Even the most forgiving refused future family inclusions for my parents and Betty and Kevin. Life improved, job satisfaction increased, and peace with Buddy's company became routine. On serene park walks, I met Brian, a compassionate software engineer with a golden retriever named Bella. Our connection, forged over shared love for dogs and similar family struggles, led to exchanging numbers and beginning to date. Each passing day, our relationship grew stronger.